Man, Timberwolves fans. Today we have two stories, and honestly, they connect in a way that says a whole lot about where this franchise is right now. Because the first one is about the future. It is about expectations, pressure, chemistry, and whether this new version of Minnesota is actually ready to take that final step we have been waiting for. After everything that changed this offseason, there is excitement. Absolutely. But there are also some very real questions that this team still has to answer before anybody starts talking like a championship is guaranteed. And then the second story takes us in a completely different direction because we need to look back at one of the most criticized decisions this franchise has ever made. A move that people around the NBA absolutely destroyed when it happened. Years later, the conversation around that decision looks completely different. And what Minnesota has accomplished since then makes it harder and harder to argue with the results. So, yeah, we have a lot to talk about today, because one story is going to make us think about what this team still needs to become, and the other might completely change the way we remember one of the biggest gambles in Timberwolves history. Before we get into both of them though, if you are enjoying the video, hit that like button and subscribe. I am Henry, and this channel is still new, so our first goal is getting this community to 500 subscribers. But I only want you subscribing if you are a real Timberwolves fan and you actually want to be here talking Wolves basketball with us every day. There is something pretty cool about being part of a community from the very beginning. Alright, Wolves fans. Let us get into the first story. Anthony Edwards recently spoke with ESPN's Rob Andrew Dongiapane during his visit to the Philippines. And I think what Ant said is actually really important considering everything that happened to this roster during the offseason. Because Minnesota did not just make a small adjustment, the Timberwolves went out and acquired Lamelo Ball from the Charlotte Hornets, putting together two of the biggest names from that 2020 draft class. And now we are talking about Lamelo Ball sharing the floor with Anthony Edwards, who has developed into one of the best players in the NBA. Just from a talent standpoint, that is exciting. Lamelo gives Minnesota a completely different type of creator at point guard. He can handle the ball, create opportunities for other guys, push the pace, and potentially take some of that playmaking responsibility away from Ant. But Wolves fans know there was a massive price attached to this move. Minnesota had to part ways with Julius Randle and Nez Reid to make the Lamelo trade happen. And that changes everything. Because you did not just lose two names from the roster. You lost a huge amount of frontcourt production, physicality, scoring, and lineup flexibility. That is why the pressure is immediately going to be there. When you make a trade this aggressive and put Lamelo Ball next to Anthony Edwards, nobody around the league is going to say, give them 3 or 4 years and see what happens. No. People are going to expect Minnesota to win right now. But Anthony Edwards himself is looking at this situation a little differently, and I actually like his approach. Ant made it clear that winning a championship would mean a lot to him. But he also said that right now, the Timberwolves are not approaching this by immediately obsessing over the championship. His message was basically step by step. Minnesota has Lamelo now. They have new pieces. The roster has changed. And before you can start talking seriously about lifting that trophy, these guys have to learn how to play together. They have to build chemistry. They have to gel. And I know some fans might hear that and think, come on, Ant, we have been waiting long enough. It is championship or nothing. I understand that feeling. But I think Anthony Edwards is being realistic. You can have all the talent in the world, but when you make significant changes to a team that already had an established identity, you cannot assume everything is going to click on opening night. And do not mistake patience for a lack of confidence either. Edwards reportedly expressed confidence in Minnesota's ability to compete with and beat teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder and San Antonio Spurs. So, Ant clearly believes in this team. He is just not skipping steps. And after the moves Minnesota made, those steps matter more than ever. Because there is still one glaring question with this roster. Who is the starting power forward? The Timberwolves failed to sign LeBron James in free agency, and they have also been linked to Jonathan Kuminga. But the problem with Kuminga is financial. Minnesota's flexibility is limited, and according to the report, the Wolves simply cannot offer the kind of contract the young forward is looking for. So right now, one of the options is Trey Lyles. Lyles played for Real Madrid last season and has 131 career NBA starts. So we are not talking about somebody who has never been in that position before. But at this point, he looks more naturally suited to being a backup power forward than the answer to a championship team's starting spot. And that is where I start getting a little nervous. Because yes, Minnesota upgraded its point guard position with Lamelo Ball. I love the offensive possibilities there. But somebody has to replace what Julius Randle and Naz Reid gave this team. That production does not magically disappear without consequences. And when you look at the roster heading toward training camp, you can see why there are still so many possibilities. Minnesota currently has 17 players on the roster, with 14 players on standard contracts and 3 players on two-way deals, leaving one roster spot open. You have Dante DiVincenzo, Lamelo Ball, Jaden McDaniels, Terrence Shannon Jr., Anthony Edwards, Jalen Clark, Bones Highland, Josh Green, Ayo Dosunmu, Trey Kaufman, Ren, Zion Poulin, Joan Behringer, Endrika Freeman, Rudy Gobert, Isaiah Evans, Trey Lyles, and Rocco Zakarski. There are some really interesting pieces there. The obvious possible starting lineup would be Lamelo Ball at point guard, Anthony Edwards next to him, Jaden McDaniels on the wing, Trey Lyles at power forward, and Rudy Gobert in the middle. But there is another possibility that I find pretty fascinating. Ayo Dosunmu could potentially enter the starting group and give Minnesota a 3-guard look, which would allow Jaden McDaniels to move to power forward. That would change the dynamic of this team considerably. And this is exactly why Anthony Edwards talking about chemistry matters. Chris Finch and his staff are going to have work to do. What combinations actually make sense? How do you maximize Lamelo without taking Ant out of his rhythm? Can Minnesota play smaller without sacrificing the defensive identity that helped make this team so dangerous? Who provides the front court scoring that disappeared when Julius Randle and Naz Reid left? And how much responsibility is now going to fall on Rudy Gobert? Because that last question leads us perfectly into our second story. And man, if you remember what people were saying about this trade 4 years ago, this conversation almost feels surreal now. When the Timberwolves traded for Rudy Gobert in 2022, Minnesota got absolutely hammered for it. ESPN and CBS Sports both reportedly gave the trade a D grade. The Athletic was a little more forgiving, giving Minnesota a C+. And look, at the time, you could understand why people were shocked. Tim Connolly had only been running the Timberwolves for a matter of months when he made this enormous gamble. Minnesota gave up 4 first-round picks, a future pick swap, recently drafted Walker Kessler, and multiple rotation players to get Gobert from the Utah Jazz. That is an enormous price. There is no way around it. But 4 years later, look at what actually happened. The Timberwolves have reached the conference finals in 2 of the past 3 seasons. And during Gobert's time in Minnesota, they have won their first-round playoff series in all but 1 season. For a franchise that spent so many years desperate just to experience consistent postseason basketball, that matters. Anthony Edwards becoming a superstar is obviously a massive reason for Minnesota's rise. Nobody should take that away from But pretending Rudy Gobert has not been essential to this era does not make sense anymore. Gobert gave this team an identity, defense, physicality, size, a team that opponents know is going to make them work for everything around the rim. Minnesota has finished as a top 10 defense in every season with Gobert, including ranking number 1 in 2023-2024, when Rudy won the 4th Defensive Player of the Year award of his career. That is not some minor detail. That defensive identity became part of what Minnesota is. We saw how important the Timberwolves' frontcourt size was when they knocked off the defending champion Denver Nuggets in the 2024 playoffs. We saw it again when Minnesota overwhelmed the Los Angeles Lakers and Golden State Warriors in 2025. And then came another massive playoff performance against Nikola Jokic. According to the analysis, with Gobert as the primary defender, Jokic shot just 42.6%. Think about the player we are talking about here. Nikola Jokic. When you have a defensive anchor capable of having that kind of impact against the very best players in basketball, it gives the rest of your roster options that most teams simply do not have. And that becomes even more important now, because Minnesota just changed the structure around Gobert. Julius Randle is gone. Naz Reid is gone. Lamelo Ball is here. That means the Wolves are moving away from some of the front court size that became such an important part of their identity. And they are asking even more from Rudy defensively. The good news is that Gobert has not shown signs of a major defensive decline. And offensively, Lamelo could potentially make his life easier. Just imagine Lamelo creating opportunities for Rudy around the rim. That combination could be really interesting. But there is another part of the Gobert trade that I think gets forgotten, and it involves Anthony Edwards. Before Minnesota acquired Rudy, Ant was already showing everybody that something special was coming. The Timberwolves had finished as the number 7 seed the season before the Gobert trade. And after Edwards' second NBA season, you could already see the star potential. But this was still a young team. It was not necessarily a mature championship group yet. Gobert gave Minnesota a proven veteran who could immediately raise the floor of the team and help get those younger players into meaningful playoff situations. And Anthony Edwards got those experiences early in his career. High-pressure games, playoff series, deep postseason runs. Moments where every possession matters. That stuff has value. Gobert has also spoken about Edwards improving his eating habits. And the broader point is that Ant has continued becoming a more mature professional while playing alongside veterans who understand what winning requires. Obviously, Anthony deserves the credit for putting in the work and becoming the player he is today. But the environment around a young superstar matters too. And Minnesota decided very early that instead of waiting around and hoping future draft picks eventually turned into something, they were going to put Edwards in meaningful games immediately. That is the part of the trade that looks smarter with every deep playoff run. When you know you have a talent like Anthony Edwards, sometimes you have to take the big swing. And Minnesota took one. There were other possibilities around that time. DeJounte Murray was reportedly one of the players linked to Minnesota. But would that have worked? Nobody can know for sure. We saw how Murray's situation eventually played out in Atlanta, and Minnesota likely still would have had to give up significant assets to acquire him. Would having some of those draft picks back be useful today? Of course, especially when you look at Minnesota's current financial limitations and the need to keep improving the roster around Anthony Edwards. Nobody is saying first-round picks do not matter, but draft picks are possibilities. What Minnesota got from the Gobert trade is something tangible: winning playoff experience, an elite defensive identity, conference finals appearances, and a veteran anchor who is still an essential part of this team, entering his 5th season in Minnesota. And here's what makes the situation even more encouraging. Outside of Gobert, Minnesota's core is made up of players who are 26 years old or younger. That means this does not necessarily have to be one final desperate run. There is a path toward sustaining this thing. And when you connect these two stories, I think you see exactly where the Timberwolves are as a franchise. The Gobert trade helped transform Minnesota from a young team with potential into a legitimate playoff force. It helped give Anthony Edwards meaningful postseason experience while he was still developing into a superstar. Now, Minnesota has taken another huge swing by bringing in Lamelo Ball. But this time, the expectations are different. We are not asking whether Anthony Edwards can become a superstar anymore. He already is one. We are not asking whether Minnesota can win playoff series. They have already done it. We are asking whether this new version of the Timberwolves can win the whole thing. And I think Ant understands exactly how difficult that is. Lamelo Ball and Anthony Edwards could become one of the most exciting backcourts in basketball. Jaden McDaniels is still incredibly important. Rudy Gobert remains the defensive anchor. Dante DiVincenzo, Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, Bones Highland, Josh Green, Ayo Dosunmu, Trey Kaufman, Rin, Zion Poulin, Joan Behringer, Enrica Freeman, Isaiah Evans, Trey Lyles, and Rocco Zakarski give Chris Finch different pieces to work with. But this team still has questions. The power forward situation needs an answer. The chemistry needs time. The loss of Julius Randle and Nez Reid needs to be absorbed. And if Jonathan Kuminga remains financially out of reach, Minnesota has to figure out whether the solution is already on this roster or whether another move is still coming. That is why I appreciate what Anthony Edwards is saying. Do not run from championship expectations. But do not pretend chemistry happens overnight either. Build it, figure out the rotation, find the identity of this new roster, and then go after Oklahoma City, San Antonio, and everybody else standing between Minnesota and the finals. Because after everything this franchise has invested, that has to be the ambition now. And as Wolves fans, I think we can be excited and still demand results. Those two feelings can exist at the same time. We can be excited about Lamelo and Ant while worrying about we can acknowledge how expensive the Rudy Gobert trade was while also admitting that 4 years later, the results have made that deal look a whole lot better than those original D and C+ grades suggested. Now comes the next challenge. Can this new roster take everything Minnesota has built over the last few seasons and finally turn it into a championship? That is what I want to hear from you guys about. Do you believe Lamelo Ball and Anthony Edwards can take this team all the way? Are you comfortable with Trey Lyles starting at power forward, or do the Wolves still need another move? And looking back now, do you consider the Rudy Gobert trade a success? Drop your opinion in the comments because I really want to know where Wolves fans stand on all of this. And if you enjoyed talking Timberwolves basketball with me today, hit the like button. This channel is still new, and we are trying to build a real Wolves community here from the ground up. Our first goal is 500 subscribers, but subscribe only if you genuinely believe in the future of this team and want to be here talking Wolves basketball with us. I am Henry, and I will see you in the next one. Go Wolves!